Beneath the silent waters of the Pacific, a single submarine forever changed the fate of the world's largest aircraft carrier. The Shinano, born from the might of Yamato's legacy and cloaked in secrecy, was meant to be Japan's ultimate trump card, a 70,000-ton fortress of steel built to turn the tide of war. Yet on her maiden voyage, she became a monument to flaws hidden beneath her armor, rushed construction, untested systems, and a crew unprepared for disaster. In just 7.5 hours, 4 torpedoes from the USS Archerfish transformed that promise of invincibility into a grave for more than 1,400 men. For the Americans, it was one of the greatest submarine victories in history, earning Commander Joseph Enright redemption and the Navy Cross. For Japan, it was not only the loss of a warship, but the collapse of pride, secrecy, and a dream of dominance at sea. This is the haunting story of how arrogance met fate, how silence buried the truth, and how a single strike in the night brought down the mightiest carrier ever built. The Pacific at night holds a silence so absolute it feels without end. On November 28, 1944, a thin, wan moon throws a faint silver ribbon across the waves. To most eyes, it would be nothing but endless black water. Tonight, however, something moves. From the guarded slips of Yokosuka, a shadow of impossible proportions slips into open sea. She is Shinano. 70,000 tons of steel and ambition, the largest aircraft carrier ever built. So immense that her silhouette swallows stars as she glides. So secret that her name has never been spoken openly. Even inside the Navy, knowing of her existence is a crime punishable by death. For months, she has been hidden behind fences and armed sentries. Now, in the dead of night, she slides out, a leviathan on her first and only voyage. Over 2,000 men stand aboard. Sailors pace unfinished passageways, their boots ringing on raw metal. Civilians pressed out of the yards to serve temporarily huddle in corners, eyes full of worry. The air is thick with paint, welding smoke, and the scent of new machinery. Her compartments have never been pressure tested. Watertight doors do not seat properly. Pumps have never been proven against real flooding. They are passengers on a giant that is still taking shape. Some of the crew laugh loudly, forcing a bravado they do not feel. Others stand mute at the rails, staring into the black swells, unaware. They are staring at their own graves. Quiet rumors circulate. This ship is too large to sink. She can shrug away bombs and shells. She is a fortress, a drifting island. Pride and dread are braided together, and one faith runs deepest. Size equals safety. But what if that size is only an illusion? What if the fortress is already a coffin? Beneath the surface, another shadow prowls. The USS Archerfish, a Belau-class submarine, is a hunter of a very different kind. 70 men live squeezed inside. A steel tube barely longer than a city block. Their air tastes of diesel, sweat, and stale coffee. Days melt into the same dull rhythm, broken only by moments of sheer terror when depth charges explode above. These men have grown used to darkness and to sitting in silence, listening for the faintest whine of propellers through water. Their Commander Joseph Enright has something to prove. After his last patrol, he was labeled too cautious, accused of letting chances slip away. This time, hesitation is unaffordable. When a faint radar contact appears, enormous and inexplicable, his officers shrug it off. Maybe it's an island. Maybe the radar is faulty. But islands do not zigzag. This contact moves like a ship. Enright stares at the glowing blip. It is so vast it borders on the absurd. He feels the pressure of the moment. Is this the chance to salvage his reputation? Could this be the largest target an American submarine has ever hunted? Shinano plows ahead like a city afloat. 10 stories tall, longer than 3 football fields, armored with steel intended to laugh at the heaviest battleship shells. Her flight deck is almost a slab of reinforced concrete built to take direct hits. Bristling with anti-aircraft guns, she projects an aura of invincibility. Yet beneath paint and plating, the truth shows: rushed welds, unsealed compartments, pipes left without proper gaskets. She is a titan born of compromise. On Archerfish, the crew presses into the control room, whispering disbelief. If the target is real, it is unlike anything they have seen, a warship whose scale strains imagination. And yet she moves with escorts, exposed in ways the submarine cannot yet fathom. The ocean itself seems to hold its breath. On one side rides a ship meant to embody the last hope of a crumbling empire. On the other, a submarine whose commander is chasing redemption with every order. By every sensible calculation, they should never cross paths. A single submarine should not threaten the mightiest warship ever constructed, and yet fate draws them together in the Black Pacific. The men on Shinano trust in secrecy, darkness, and the sheer mass of their steel stronghold. The men on Archerfish trust in patience, skill, and a handful of torpedoes. Neither side understands that before dawn, one of them will be gone. This is the midnight gamble, a duel of giant and hunter, arrogance and persistence, secrecy and discovery. A clash no one planned and no one predicted, and one that will end in tragedy. As Shinano forges ahead into the night, one last question lingers in the dark. How can the world's largest warship, a vessel built to be unsinkable, be felled on her maiden voyage? To answer that, go back to the summer of 1942, June, the month of fire and ruin. At Midway, the proud Imperial Japanese Navy, once the undisputed master of the Pacific, received a wound it would never fully heal. In a single day, 4 great carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were consumed by flames and sent to the deep. With them went hundreds of veteran pilots, the core of Japan's striking force. It was not merely defeat, it was humiliation. The disaster was carefully concealed from the public and even from parts of the government. Outwardly, the empire still trumpeted victories. Behind closed doors, the Admiralty knew the truth. The age of the battleship was over. Carriers were now the queens of the sea. Japan had lost nearly half of its crown in one terrible blow. What does an empire do when its sharpest sword is shattered? In the shipyards of Yokosuka lay an answer in the form of a silent, half-built gray hull. It had begun as a battleship, the third of the Yamato line, a sister to Yamato and Musashi, titans, armed with guns capable of hurling shells heavier than a car across enormous distances. Her name was Shinano. She was meant to be the apex of battleship design, an impregnable fortress of steel. But the world had changed. Desperation warped strategy. The Admiralty stared at the half-finished hull, and a radical idea took hold. What if this battleship could be reborn as something else? Not a spear that led the charge, but a bastion that sustained others. Not a sword, but a shield. With a stroke of a pen, Shinano's destiny bent. She would not emerge as a battleship. She would be transformed into the largest aircraft carrier the world had seen. The conversion bordered on controlled madness. Engineers tore up blueprints, redrafted plans, and improvised at fever pitch. Time was a luxury they did not have. America's industrial tide rolled across the Pacific with a force Japan could not match. New Essex-class carriers seemed to stream from American yards every few months. Japan, bleeding men and material, demanded miracles. Shinano had to be finished. Not next year, not next month, but now. Yet how does one turn a creature of brute force into a vessel of speed and purpose? Shinano's bones betrayed her origins. Her hull was massively armored, built to shrug off the heaviest shells. Her central citadel, the armored heart of a battleship, was thick enough to stop almost anything thrown at it. Armor means weight, and weight consumes space. Unlike American carriers that could be designed with 2 or 3 hangar decks, Shinano's belly could not be cut open so freely. She would have only one enormous hangar. She would not be a true fleet carrier, but a hybrid, a compromise born of urgency. Still, a vision emerged from desperation. Shinano would not simply carry planes, she would carry the war. 120 replacement aircraft could be stowed in her cavernous hangar. Vast tanks would hold aviation fuel, munitions, and spare parts. She would shadow the main fleet, not lead it, but sustain it. A floating arsenal, a mobile repair base, a lifeline that might push the conflict months farther. On paper, it read like brilliance. In practice, it became a nightmare. The shipyards were already stretched to breaking. Skilled workers had been drafted into the army. Their places were filled by students, older men, and conscripted Korean labor. Many were untrained, few were experienced. Welding was hurried, rivets crooked, and shortcuts became commonplace. Pride gave way to desperation. A layer of gray paint masked the flaws, but the steel beneath was compromised, and time pressed down, harder each day. American bombers prowled the skies. The threat of B-29 raids over Yokosuka grew with every dawn. High command feared that if Shinano stayed in dock, she would be destroyed before she ever sailed. Captain Toshio Abe, a seasoned officer, was handed command. He walked her half-finished corridors, saw warped watertight doors, untested pumps, and a green crew. He pleaded with his superiors to delay the voyage, to test compartments and train men. His pleas were drowned by urgency and fear. The Admiralty did not fear torpedoes so much as bombs from the sky. Each day in dock was a gamble they deemed too great, and the order finally came down. Sail her out. Sail her now. Imagine the weight on Abe's shoulders, the largest ship ever built entrusted to a commander who knew his giant was not whole. He had to take her to sea anyway. The fate of over 2,000 souls rested not on readiness, but on secrecy and luck. The irony was brutal. Born from the ashes of Midway and conceived as an answer to Japan's gravest naval defeat, Shinano was sent to sea before her own body had finished being made. A ship meant to be unsinkable, launched unfinished into waters full of unseen predators. It was the very definition of a gamble. And so late in November 1944, with the American noose tightening around Japan, Shinano slid out of her dockyard cradle. Her great engines wake with a deep, reluctant roar. She drives herself through the Pacific swells, decks packed with men who cannot fathom the danger they face. To most aboard, she is a bastion, an island, the Empire's last trump card. To Captain Toshio Abe, she is an obligation he cannot refuse. But the Pacific grants no clemency to unfinished hopes. As Shinano steams toward what her maker's dream will be safety, fate slides her onto a path that intersects with a silent hunter lying in wait beneath the waves. When people name Shinano, they first reach for size. She is not merely big, she is colossal beyond contemporary imagination. Roughly 872 feet from stem to stern, 70,000 tons riding the water, longer than 3 football fields, taller than a 10-story block, and wider than many streets in Tokyo. Her flight deck is not the fragile wood of early carriers, but a massive slab of reinforced steel and concrete, built to shrug off 500-kilogram bombs. Heavy armor belts cloak her sides, intended to turn away the most monstrous naval shells. On paper, she is an island unto herself, a fortress unmatched on the sea. Paper, however, lies. The Shinano that slips from Yokosuka in late November 1944 is no immaculate wonder. She is the product of panic and compromise, half-finished and pushed afloat, because a desperate nation insisted on miracles it no longer had the resources to buy. Walk her passageways, and you hear steel protesting under strain rather than the confident clank of a perfected ship. Time has stolen the craftsmen who would have finished her properly. Master welders and shipwrights were drafted long ago. In Dake, their place are students, older men, and conscripted Koreans with little training and no choice. Work is hurried, welds superficial, rivets askew. In places, seams barely hold. A coat of gray paint masks flaws that paint cannot make watertight. The most vital organs, the systems that decide whether a warship lives or dies, are the most vulnerable. A ship survives by compartmentation, sealing off flooded sections, so the whole hull does not drown. On Shinano, hundreds of compartments have never been tested under pressure. Watertight doors, the heavy wheels meant to lock them tight, are warped and misaligned and sometimes will not close properly. Ventilation. Ducts and piping that should be sealed with gaskets have been left open, creating hidden routes for water. Her defensive immune system is compromised before she has even fired a shot. Picture a sailor in one of those dim, unfinished corridors, turning the wheel on a door that should lock like a vault. The spindle spins loosely, the door rattles in its frame, and he shrugs, assuming repairs will come later. But there is no later. Captain Abe sees these failures with the eye of a man who understands what pumps and seals mean when metal meets torpedo. He knows the gulf between a ship that can absorb a hit and stagger home and one that dies almost immediately. Repeatedly, he begs for delay. Test the compartments, train the crew. The Admiralty will not listen. They fear not torpedoes but bombs falling from the skies. American B-29s fly higher and farther than Japan can counter. Each week, their raids creep nearer. To the leadership, leaving Shinano in dock invites destruction there and then. Sending her out is at least a chance. It is a cruel calculus. Risk annihilation in the slip, or risk disaster at sea. Abe follows orders, though dread sits heavy on him. Even secrecy becomes a burden. There is no launching ceremony, no fanfare to honor the workmen or steady the crew. Shinano slips away like a thief, wrapped in silence. Those who hurried her together are forbidden to speak of her. The men aboard have never drilled for combat or practiced damage control. They step onto her decks untrained, untested, unaware that their preparation may be the thin line between life and death. Ignorance becomes comfort for many. They look at her size and read invulnerability. They laugh off faults they either do not see or choose to ignore. Abe does not share that comfort. He has seen the warped doors, the raw welds, the pumps that do not function. He knows his giant runs on borrowed time. The irony is bitter. The world's largest carrier and its most delicate one at once, armored like a battleship, yet with a heart unfinished. As she departs Yokosuka, destroyer escorts churn the sea into foam. The carrier's engines throb, each piston stroke like a drum counting down to an unseen hour. Abe stands on the bridge, peering into the night and wishing the dangers he fears were farther away. Danger already knows her course. Below, Archerfish lies in wait. Soon, every unsealed door, every broken weld, every shortcut hidden beneath paint will be tried not by inspection but by combat. Far under the restless surface exists another world. Narrow steel corridors, dim lights, stale recycled air, and the constant mechanical rhythm of a living machine. This is the realm of USS Archerfish, a Ballo-class submarine patrolling hostile seas. For the 70 men aboard, life is a long loop of silence and tension, long hours of waiting broken by sudden terror. Privacy does not exist. Sailors sleep. Shoulder to shoulder, sometimes hot bunking into a bunk still warm from the man who just left it. Diesel clings to everything. Air is breathed over and over until it tastes of sweat and oil. The hull vibrates with machinery. The boat is alive and the crew are locked inside her ribs. For weeks, this steel tube is their entire universe. They are the silent service, the Navy's invisible hunters, a world few outside truly understand. Imagine living in constant half-light where one wrong noise or a stray bubble can bring destroyers grinding in with depth charges that pound the sea like thunder. To be a submariner is to wager with each breath. It takes a particular temper, patient, disciplined, at home with fear as a steady companion. At the center of that world stands Commander Joseph F. Enright. A career submariner, he carries the stain of a previous patrol where he was judged too cautious, accused of letting enemy convoys escape. In the unforgiving culture of the silent service, such a mark can end a man's career. Now aboard Archerfish, Enright sees perhaps his last chance. He drives his crew relentlessly, torpedo runs, crash dives, damage control drills until reactions become automatic muscle memory. Men grumble, but they know hesitation means death. For Enright, redemption is not an abstract honor. It is survival. Then, on the night of November 28, 1944, the ocean delivers the extraordinary. The radar operator calls out a contact, enormous and strange, at first almost unbelievable. It dwarfs the blips of destroyers and merchantmen. One officer suggests the reading is false, perhaps a phantom island. But islands do not move. This contact moves, zigzagging with intent. Enright orders a course change. The boat swings toward the unknown and the atmosphere below shifts. Boredom evaporates and a sharp current of anticipation fills the control room. This is no routine patrol. Through the periscope, a silhouette rises against the moonlit horizon, long, broad, towering. An aircraft carrier, yes, but larger than any reported in their intelligence, escorted by destroyers whose wakes flicker in the starlight. For a moment, Enright cannot quite believe his eyes. Could this be real? Could he have found the largest warship afloat? The hunter in him ignites. He orders all engines forward. Archerfish charges on the surface, pushing nearly 19 knots. It is a perilous gamble. Speed throws a white wake that can betray them. But Enright takes the risk. The diesel engines strain, the hull shudders, men lean into their stations, eyes glued to gauges and ears tuned to sonar. Above, escorting destroyers carve the sea in sharp lines, ready to strike at any sign of intrusion. Inside Archerfish, a tense hush settles. Every man knows they are hurrying toward a clash that could end them in minutes. What does the hunter feel now? Excitement? Fear? For Enright, it is something more acute and personal, the long-awaited chance to restore his reputation and make his name. He is no longer the cautious commander who held back. Tonight, he is the predator incarnate. Unease eats at the crew as the submarine closes the distance. The target moves too quickly for an easy pursuit. Destroyers slip through formation, their searchlights poised to stab the night. One slip, one careless look, and the hunter becomes the hunted. Inside the cramped control room, men whisper. Some wipe damp brows, though the air is cool. Others sit wordless, hands clenched on their posts as if grip alone can steady them against the enormity unfolding. Above, the great ship cleaves the sea, her decks packed with sailors who do not know they are being tailed. Below, a single sub lunges onward, outnumbered, outgunned, yet unwilling to break off the chase. The ocean, vast and indifferent, turns into an arena. On one side, the largest carrier ever built, a rushing titan bound for what her crew believes is safety. On the other, a lone wolf, thin and determined, wagering everything on one flawless blow. The chase is on, and with every throb of the sub's engines, the distance narrows. What happens when the ocean's smallest predator locks onto its biggest prey? The sea seems to hold its breath as the two shadows circle. One enormous and arrogant, the other compact and relentless. Shinano cuts through the night, her black flanks faintly shining beneath the weak moon. Behind her, Archerfish strains forward, diesels howling at their limits. A chance meeting has become a pursuit that will decide thousands of lives. From Shinano's bridge, lookouts peer into the dark and suddenly cry out, a conning tower breaking the moonlit surface. An alarm screams. Escorts snap to action. The bow. Destroyer Asokaz peels away and charges, her bow biting into the sea as she races for the intruder. For the men of Archerfish, that sight sends every pulse pounding. A destroyer at close range is annihilation incarnate. One well-placed depth. Charge and the sub would be torn apart. Enright braces for the worst. The sub stands no chance in a surface duel with a destroyer. Then, unexpectedly, signals flicker from Shinano's bridge and orders ripple through the group. Captain Abe, wary of a trap, calls Asokaz back, the lone. Contact looks too bold, too conspicuous. Maybe a decoy meant to lure escorts away while others wait in ambush. Better, Abe decides, to keep his screens close and rely on the carrier's speed and zigzagging. In a decision that will later be judged reckless, he aborts the attack. For Enright, it is an almost unbelievable reprieve as the destroyer slides back into formation. Archerfish lives a little longer. Abe orders Shinano up to 20 knots. Her engines groan as speed climbs and she begins sharp, irregular turns through the swells. For a while it seems to work. The sub falls back, the giant surges ahead, leaving only a faint foaming wake. In Archerfish, frustration boils. Their diesels are strained to the limit. 19 knots is the ceiling. Enright watches helplessly as the prize drifts away. For hours, the duel turns into a cruel race. The sub lunges, the carrier pulls away, the distance stretching and shrinking. In the control room, men grit their teeth in silence, knowing they chase a phantom too swift to seize. The chance is slipping through their fingers, yet fate can be unkind to the enormous. A shudder runs through Shinano's hull. Deep in the engineering spaces, men scramble. A propeller shaft bearing has overheated, a consequence of hurried construction and unproven machinery. A message comes up to the bridge. Reduce speed or risk catastrophic failure. Abe curses his luck. To slow now with an enemy near feels like surrender, but the engines cannot be pushed further. Reluctantly, he orders a reduction to 18 knots, almost the same speed as Archerfish. The gap stops widening, and the hunter is back in the game. Enright feels the shift immediately. Frustration turns to sharp elation. He knows the moment is brittle. One wrong move, and it will vanish. He tells his men to hold position, to trail the giant just outside the escort's reach. Thus begins the strangest of ballets. Hour after hour, the sub follows, trimming course. With every turn waiting for a clean alignment, Shinano zigzags, her escorts alert but blind to the predator just beyond sight. Each maneuver is measured by Enright, who studies angles and runs firing solutions in his head. Not yet. Not here. He waits for fortune to hand him a single perfect shot. Below decks, tension tightens like a coiled spring. Conversation dwindles. Some men wipe sweat though the night is cold. Others sit rigid at their posts, ears filled with the boat's mechanical pulse. They know that when Enright gives the word, they will have one chance. 6 torpedoes and no second try. On Shinano, a false sense of safety returns. The crew convinces themselves the brief submarine sighting was a false alarm now past. They relax and laugh, some even gathering on deck in the moonlight, oblivious that a patient predator still waits. The hours grind on, a deadly dance of giant and shadow, destroyers plowing the waves unaware. Every beat of Shinano's engines feels like a countdown. By the early morning, the pieces are set. One turn, one simple course change, will swing the Leviathan broadside to her hunter. For Enright, it would be the defining instant of his command, and his men's fate. Which single move will decide it? Will the world's largest warship slip into the shelter of home waters, or stumble straight into the jaws already waiting below? The night ages. It is just after 3 on the morning of November 29th, 1944. The Pacific lies calm, the moon faint. Shinano plows on, her black mass huge against the dim stars, confident she is nearing safety and drawing closer to Japan. On her bridge, Captain. Abe orders a turn to the south. To him, one more evasive zigzag. To the men below, routine. To the stalking sub, it is the gift of a lifetime. Inside Archerfish, Enright feels his chest tighten as the giant swings broadside. The impossible becomes possible. He has a single opportunity. His voice is steady as he gives the command. Prepare to fire. In the forward torpedo room, sailors scramble into position. 6 tubes are set. The outer doors yaw and sea rushes in. Men hold their breath in the narrow, oil-slick compartments, sweat running down despite the chill. The firing range is barely under 400 yards, point blank for a submarine, and Enright wastes no time. Fire, one after another 6. Mark 14 torpedoes part the night, leaving pale trails of bubbles that catch the moonlight. For the men of Archerfish, the seconds after the launch stretch into an eternity. They know the routine. Launch, dive, hide. The boat noses down, ballast tanks gulping, gauges trembling as the steel tube sinks into the black. Above, destroyers will soon sweep the sea with murderous intent. First, though, the torpedoes must find their prey. On Shinano, most of the crew have grown weary. The alarm from hours before has dulled into a grim background. A lookout, eyes heavy with fatigue, blinks and thinks he is mistaken. Then he makes out pale wakes cutting the water, long phosphorescent streaks moving far too fast. His shout rips the night. Torpedoes! The alarm bell screams. Men scramble, shout, slip on tilting decks, but it is too late. The first torpedo slams into the stern, with a sound like a mountain collapsing. Steel folds. A shockwave stuns the ship, rattling beams and frames. Fuel and stores rupture. A hole appears where none should be. The second strikes near an engine room. Water pours in, flooding the space in minutes and drowning sailors at their posts. The third blows through beneath a boiler room, scalding steam, mixing with seawater to kill dozens and silence the great engines. The ship's heart begins to fail. The fourth destroys a damage control station, smashing pumps and compressors, the very machines needed to save her. Explosions hammer through, the hull like final verdicts. Within moments, the Titan meant to survive has been opened in the weakest seam, where thick battleship plating gives way to the lighter carrier structure. It is her Achilles heel, and Archerfish has hit it true. By fortune or mistake, Enright had set his torpedoes shallow, assuming a conventional carrier profile. Had they run deeper, they might have struck uselessly against Shinano's armored belt. Instead, they exploded high, where protection was thinnest. Whether by luck or design, he delivered the perfect killing pattern. Panic erupts inside Shinano. Bulkheads groan and shudder. Lights flicker and die. Corridors flood with smoke and seawater. Civilian laborers, pulled from yards and never trained for combat, scream in terror. Sailors race to close doors that no longer seat, to man pumps that either don't work or have not been proven. The ship lists sharply to starboard, every step a peril. Picture standing on that vast flight deck as explosions batter the hull. The deck shudders beneath your feet. Men topple and are flung to the steel, and in the trembling hush you hear the roar of the sea pouring into the wounded giant. Japan's faith in size and armor shatters in less than a minute. Deep below, in Archerfish's control room, men listen to instruments and hear the dull, dragging sounds of metal tearing through water. They know the torpedoes found flesh. Enright does not cheer. He simply orders the submarine deeper. The destroyers will now hunt, and the wolf must disappear before the shepherds come. Above, Shinano's officers cling to belief. 4 hits, yes. But this is the largest carrier ever built. 70,000 tons. A walking fortress. Damage control teams plunge into smoke-choked corridors with flashlights, barking orders to seal compartments, start pumps, correct the list. For a time, the wound seems survivable. The list steadies at about 10 degrees and the bridge allows a sliver of hope. Captain Abe chooses to press on. He orders 18 knots, convinced speed will carry them to safer waters and that lingering in dock was a greater danger. But that decision turns the ocean into an ally of destruction. With gaping breaches, the faster the ship runs, the more sea it drags inside. Pumps strain and cough, unable to hold back the torrent. Men crank watertight wheels only to find them warped and unable to seal. Workers hammer wedges into gaps. Water seeps through ventilation trunks that were never properly gasketsed, finding invisible paths from compartment to compartment. What should be containment becomes a spreading calamity. As minutes become hours, the list grows. 12 degrees, then 14, then 15. Each degree is another step toward doom as water spills over bulkheads into spaces thought safe. Corridors tilt into steep ramps. Equipment rolls and crushes. Men claw their way hand over hand along pipes and ladders. Some slip and are swept into dark, rushing water. The once level flight deck becomes a slanted slope. Men sliding helplessly toward the starboard edge. Abe still hopes to beach the ship on the Japanese coast and save her. Every turn of the propellers, however, forces more of the Pacific into Shinano's wounds. By about 5 in the morning, nearly 2 hours after the attack, the list exceeds 15 degrees, and the mood aboard sours from strained confidence to raw dread. The chain of failures completes itself. Flawed construction, untested systems, untrained crews, fractured command. Courage cannot close the widening seams. The mighty floating fortress is now a hollow colossus, leaning deeper with every tick of the clock. Below the waves, Archerfish slips away into the dark. At dawn, the first gray light reveals a terrible sight. The world's largest carrier dying before the eyes of her crew. Shinano tilts farther. Boiler rooms fall silent one after another as flooding drowns fires and engines cough and die. The ship's heartbeat stops, lights vanish, pumps go still, ventilation fails. Men trapped in the bowels stumble, flashlights bobbing, their voices muffled beneath the thunder of rushing water. On deck, sailors crawl and stagger, trying to launch life rafts that slide and tumble into the froth. Others leap into the cold sea, their cries lost to wind and wave. Escorting destroyers circle helplessly, flinging ropes and towing lines that snap like thread under the strain of 70,000 tons of waterlogged steel. Shinano is no longer a ship that can be hauled to safety. She is an anchor, pulling herself down. Captain Abe remains on the bridge, pale and rigid, watching the truth become undeniable. By mid-morning, the list passes 30 degrees. The flight deck becomes nearly vertical and men slip helplessly toward the rail. The order to abandon ship finally goes out and panic explodes. Nets and ladders leaping into lifeboats and the sea, the surface a chaos of arms and cries. Destroyers take aboard as many as they can. The lucky are hauled up, dazed and shivering. Hundreds more are left clinging to timber and wreckage, or pulled under by exhaustion and the immense suction of the sinking giant. At 10:57 a.m., the last noise is heard. Bulkheads collapse, compartments implode, and with a thunderous roar, Shinano rolls onto her starboard side and slides beneath the waves, stern first, her bow clawing momentarily at the sky before vanishing into the deep. Water tears life rafts and men from the deck and drags them into the vortex of her final plunge. Then, abruptly, silence. In roughly 7.5 hours, the largest warship on Earth has ceased to exist. Where a floating city once towered, only wreckage and survivors dot the swells. Around 1,000 men, roughly 1,080, are hauled from the freezing water, but hundreds remain in the sea and many perish. Archerfish, deep and silent, feels every concussion of the escort's depth charges but escapes. When she surfaces, later the horizon is empty of any towering silhouette, only drifted wreckage. Enright records the kill in his log under the best estimate he can make, a carrier of about 28,000 tons of a Hayataka class. He cannot know the whole truth. Allied intelligence did not believe Shinano existed. The survivors taken aboard destroyers, meet, not comfort, but quarantine. Isolated barracks, silence enforced by threat, letters forbidden. The loss is a national disgrace. To admit such a failure would be to admit the empire's decline. So the government buries the event. Shinano vanishes from official records. Her name is scrubbed from reports. More than 1,400 sailors, including Captain Abe, are simply listed as missing or casualties in an unspecified incident. In life, the ship had been secret. In death, she remains so. Only after the war, when Allied investigators examine captured documents and cross-reference patrol reports, does the picture coalesce. A Yamato-class hull converted into a supercarrier, lost on the date and in the place that matches Archerfish's action. Piece by piece, the truth emerges. Commander Joseph Enright, once marked as overly cautious, is credited with one of the greatest submarine victories in history. By skill, chance, and persistence, he sank a 70,000-ton warship, the largest ever destroyed by a submarine, and is awarded the Navy Cross. The triumph is heavy. What went down was not merely steel, but a nation's desperate monument to power, conceived in hubris and built under pressure. Over 1,400 souls rest in her broken hull 3 miles beneath the waves, their voices silenced not only by depth, but by shame. Families waited for news that never came. For decades, Shinano's story was half remembered and half denied, a ghost rarely named. She lies now in the dark, her vast frame broken and visited only by currents and creatures beyond human reach. To be erased from memory is to be denied a second life. Perhaps that is the deepest tragedy of all. The loss teaches a blunt lesson. Shortcuts, arrogance, and secrecy can undo even the mightiest constructions. The submarine Archerfish did not merely sink a ship. It exposed the fatal faults